What were the cannibals of Dagobah? The cannibals of Dagobah were a group of 26 stranded humans who referred to themselves as the Children. They were the descendants of the explorers and their group who had arrived at the planet 40 years earlier, who had all slowly died off due to the harsh conditions and lack of food and had went insane, until the last parents had died, leaving the children to survive on their own. The children had ate nothing but fungus and moss, leading them to have a very pale and skeletal-like appearance, and with nothing else to eat, the dying parents had allowed the children to cannibalize them in their final days. Due to this, the children developed a huge fondness for human flesh. After completely devouring the parents, they were desperate for more flesh, but with nothing left, they resorted to eating fungus once again until one day in 1 AB. The Shiido anthropologist Mammon Hall with his nephew and niece Zach and Tash Aranda, accompanied by the legendary Platter Keith and her smugglers, all seeking refuge away from a pricey imperial bounty on their heads, unknowingly being followed by the stealthy Boba Fett, practically crash-landed on Dagobah. As they walked on an artificial path made by the children, Zach missed a jump and fell into a swamp, where two corpses started pulling at him. Frightened, he desperately tried to scramble up to the stepping stone, but he slipped on moss. He then felt a cold, wet hand close around his arm. Platt fired her blaster, killing the corpse, and was about to kill the other corpse when it ordered her to stop. Everyone getting a closer look at it realized it wasn't a corpse, but a young human male who had skin so pale that Zach was sure he had never received any sunlight, and so thin he appeared as a living skeleton with a skull-shaped face. When asked why he attacked them, he lied and said they were hunting, but when Zach fell into the water and they saw he was just a boy, they tried to help. Everyone knew this was a lie, but since the man appeared as no threat, they kept him alive. When asked who he was, he said his name was Galt and his parents were the explorers, and that there were 25 children alive now, with one of them dead. Revealing himself as one of the children, he agreed to escort them to his home, but he insisted bringing his dead companion, licking his lips as he said it. They reached their destination a half-hour later. The shelter, as Galt had called it, was a small island of dry ground, large enough to hold 20 to 30 small huts. The 24 remaining children came out of their huts, their eyes wide with joyful hunger, staring at the delicious newcomers. Galt hurried over and quickly whispered something to them, and they briskly carried away the dead children's body out of sight. The whispering made Platt suspicious, and she ordered Trib, her Twi'lek companion, and 2 of her smugglers to go check on the ship, believing the children were plotting to steal it. Unknowing of the far worse fate they were planning for her and her crew, Galt returned to the group and told them the children agreed to let them stay. Hull then asked if they had any records of the explorers, and Galt played a hologram left by their parents that recorded the slow downfall of the explorers over the years. At the end of the hologram, the mother was trying to say she was feeding the children her flesh, but she lost power and the group didn't understand what she was going to say. After the hologram ended, one of the children came, offering thin strips of meat that was actually the flesh of the dead child from earlier. It looked disgusting and smelled worse. Luckily, everyone objected. Galt delightedly gobbled all of it. Hull and the children began a conversation, and Zach said he wanted to get off the planet and go somewhere else. The children were revealed to be so isolated and recluse that Galt, confused, asked what was somewhere else when Zach said it was another planet among the stars. Galt asked what were stars. Zach, shocked, understood that the children had been so isolated and hidden all this time that they hadn't even ever seen any stars or planets or felt any sunlight on their skin because the gnarly trees were so thick they completely blotted out the sky. Zach then asked how they had survived for so long being so isolated, and Galt responded they ate mostly mushrooms. When Zach asked what the meat from earlier was, Galt, stuttering, quickly lied that it was just a lucky find and then briskly changed the subject. Night fell and everyone was going to sleep. Pat posted a sentry in the middle of the village to guard everyone if Boba Fett came. Soon everyone but Zach was fast asleep. He heard voices from the outside, pitch blackness and a short grunt, and something big moving alongside the ground. He got up to check, and to his horror, upon closer inspection, he saw the head of the sentry guard on the floor, but the rest of his body was gone. The children had killed him for his flesh, but Galt of course lied and concluded the death of the guard to be the cause of a creature. Zach was going over to talk to Galt when he was bitten by a small meat flower. Galt kept pretending to be friendly and said the bite was poisonous when it wasn't, and healed the wound. Zach then met Yoda and had a short conversation with him before returning back to camp and telling everyone his discovery of Yoda. Everyone unaware that the children had caught Boba Fett and had caged him and had turned Galt's hut into a kitchen and cooking the sentry from the previous night. Platt sent Zach and Tash with two of her smugglers looking for Yoda. Galt asked where they were going as the feast was ready. The children had brought a large pot of a brown broth with huge chunks of meat, which were the sentry's flesh. Zach found the smell delicious and hadn't eaten in all day and really wanted to get at least a taste before he left, but luckily his sister forced him to leave before he did. Later on their trip, Trot, one of the smugglers, was telling Zach about his marriage ring when suddenly a giant spider had encountered them, and more appeared. Trot ordered the Aranda kids to back away. They retreated into a hole in a gnarly tree. While they were in there, they heard Trot say, "Who was there?" and "Oh, it's just you." Trot then screamed in pain, and the Aranda kids went to see what had happened, to find all the spiders dead, but also the other smuggler dead and Trot down with a severe injury to the head. Trot, barely still alive, tried to tell them it had been the children, but he was too injured. Then they heard rustling in a nearby bush and Galt emerged, surprised to see the kids. They had almost caught him. He asked what they were doing here, and the kids explained everything and ordered him to carry Trot back to camp. Hoping Hool or Platt would aid his wounds, Trot tried to tell them it had been Galt, but too injured, he swooned. The kids found Yoda again and went with him to a spider, where Yoda taught them a lesson of nature. After the lesson, Yoda told Zach to return to camp as he would further teach Tash about the Force and nature. Zach, with a jealous disappointment, agreed. When he arrived to camp with hunger, to find the children had a feast ready. He was about to eat when he luckily stalled and wanted to check on Trot first. Galt attempted to stop him twice, telling him he was resting, but Zach persisted and went. Galt, to cover up Trot's arm being gone, told him they amputated it due to a poisonous spider wound. They had saved his life. When Zach had seen nothing wrong with his arm and Yoda had told him the spiders weren't poisonous, Zach rubbed the suspiciousness off and figured Galt was somehow right. The children had obviously amputated Trot's arm for food. Galt asked Zach if he would eat now, and Zach said yes. He went back to the center of the village where the cooking pot was to see the rest of the children savagely licking the last drops of their stews like animals. The pot had enough stew left for one last bowl. It was a brown broth with huge chunks of meat, which were human flesh. Zach, unaware of this, got his bowl and sat down, stirring his bowl, about to take a bite of the meat. When horrified, he stopped it short of his mouth. He saw a ring in the stew, not just any ring, but Trot's marriage ring. He remembered it from earlier. Disgusted, he threw the bowl away and Galt asked, what was wrong with him, Zack showed him the ring. Gort tried to lie, saying it must have fallen out of his pocket as he was serving Zack his stew, but Zack had been there and he hadn't seen that happen. Just then Hull arrived with the smugglers. They had been hunting for Fett all day, returning with nothing, unaware of his fate. Hungry, they asked what was for lunch and Gort went to cook another feast. Then Hull asked Platt about Trot. Platt said the children had placed plants on his wounds to stop his bleeding and that he was in shock. She remarked she would be too, if she had lost an arm and leg as well. Hull then left again with Platt and her smugglers to find Yoda and Tash. It was only when they left that Zack was struck with the terrifying realization of what Platt had just said. She had said Trot had also lost a leg. Just then Gort came and asked Zack if he was ready for more lunch, since they were cooking more for the smooth Gullers, but now they were gone. Then Zack's horror came true. Gort, licking his lips, said they even had a nice beefy leg. Zack shrieked. Gort tried to cover it up by saying they had gotten the leg from a young dragon snake. Gort walked away, heavily chuckling to himself, knowing Zack might be starting to discover the dark, disturbing, well-kept secret truth about the children. Zack, shook with shock and fear, had to find out what were the real intentions and characters of the children. Zack quietly and carefully snuck to the roof of the kitchen. He saw the children walking in and out of the hut with evil grins and licking their lips with bowls of stew. Through a hole in the roof he saw a bubbling stew being stirred by one of the children, the same stew Zack had almost eaten. He heard the children praising the human meat and saying they had been desperately waiting for it for many years since they last had it from their dying parents' bodies. Heavily grinning, licking their lips and a look of monstrosity in their eyes as they said it, Zack saw the cook go for a taste and in his spoon he saw something that 100% confirmed everything. A human finger. His stomach twisted. He now understood and realized everything. The children were not innocent frail beings. They were the dark evil beings that had played them pretending to be. Only when they were all along planning a disturbing plot to give them all the worst fate imaginable. The chef's next comments revealed they were cooking the sentry. He then nauseatingly remarked they wished they had gotten his head because it was the best part. Zack's knuckles went white, clenching his teeth trying to prevent himself from throwing up. He now understood how the children had been getting so much food and who had killed all the smugglers. And what became of their remains. They had been getting so much food suddenly ever since they arrived. First the sentry had been downed and the children cooked food. Then Trout's partner in the spider fight had been killed and the children cooked more food again. Then Trot had been wounded, his arm and leg amputated and was now probably completely chopped up, his remaining body by parts for future feasts, and the children had cooked more food each time. When they had all arrived he remembered the disgusting looking and foul smelling thin strips of meat the children had offered them. That was before anyone died. But then he remembered the one child at the beginning that Platt had shot when he fell into the swamp and how Gort had persisted to carry him tea. Oh, the camp, and licking his lips and smiling as he had said it, Zack could barely hold his vomit at this point. These Pishkos were cannibals. They had even eaten one of their own kind. Just then he felt the meat flour in his pocket from earlier bite him on the hip. He cried out in pain and violently scrambling trying to get it off. His movements were too much for the roof and he went crashing down into the kitchen, face first into the monstrous smiling face of Gort, and all he said was one word: dinner. Section 2. The Escape. A few minutes later, Zack found himself encaged. There were many other cages around him, but he couldn't tell who or what was in them since the hut was only lit by the cooking fire, which was far across from him. He shook his cage, trying to escape. Galt let out an evil chuckle, telling him the cage was made of gnarled tree roots, too strong for him to break out of. Galt left to check if Hull and the smugglers were still gone. Zack grabbed the bars again and tried shaking them again. Then he heard a voice telling him to stop trying. Zack looked over to the cage next to him, hidden by the shadows. It didn't match the voice of Hull or Tash or any of the smugglers, but it was still somehow familiar, but he couldn't make out who it was in the darkness. He looked around the hut and then he spotted it. A helmet, and Zack had seen that helmet many times before. It was the helmet of the legendary Boba Fett. Zack gasped in disbelief. He couldn't believe the children had even gotten someone as good as Boba Fett. However, Boba Fett explained they had gotten him when he was unconscious after fighting a dragon snake. The cannibalism of the children didn't seem to bother Fett, and he just shrugged at it. When Zack asked why, he didn't care. He just said if they were gonna kill him, they'd have to come in the cage themselves and get him. He believed they weren't strong enough to kill him. Then, as if challenging Fett's claim, Galt returned with an evil grin on his face, telling them their friends were still gone. Zack told him he couldn't just eat other human beings. It was cannibalism. Galt said to the children they weren't human beings, they were nothing but food, and that was their only purpose. He ranted on praising human meat, explaining how it had all started when their dying parents feed them their flesh. He said it with an evil grin, licking his lips. There was no talking sense with these monsters. They had completely lost all their sanity and humanity a long time ago. Zack's stomach shuddered. He now realized what the dying mother he had seen in the hologram was doing before she had lost power. Galt ordered the chef to amputate Zack's head, to drain all the blood before cutting it into slices. The chef reached for the knife, ready to kill Zack. Zack had planned for this already. He pulled his free hand and stuck it hard into his pocket, so the meat flour could bite, which he had counted on. He then dragged his arm through the now open door of the cage, the meat flour still attached to the arm, into the face of Galt. The meat flour bit Galt's face and stuck itself to it. He took this brief moment of the chef shock to shove her into the bubbling pot of stew. He then immediately dove for Fett's armor and blaster, freed him and gave him his stuff, and they ran out of the hut. Zack asked Fett if they should go to his ship, but Fett replied it was too far and the children, knowing the swamp so well, could catch them in no time. Zack looked behind to see Fett was correct. Some of the children were already closing in from behind and could sense the others would get them ahead from the other sides. Zack told Fett he knew where to go, and they went there. The children caught up to them there, but they fell into a trap and were stopped. Zack was able to reunite with Hull and Tash and the smugglers, and they were all able to successfully leave Dagobah, escaping the children and Fett, whom, when they were safe from the children, had turned on Zack and his friends again. He had come to Dagobah because Vader had given him a bounty to track down Zack, Hull and Tash, and to kill all and turn them into the Empire. But he had to temporarily abandon that goal when the children became an interfering threat, but with them gone, he could return to the goal of his mission. I'll reveal more details of how exactly Fett was unable to get them and what exactly happened to the children in the finale of the novel, and how Boba Fett found out about Dagobah and what he did with his discovery of the planet and Yoda. In other lore vids of this novel, I have planned to soon release. And in case you're wondering the reason why Fett didn't use his blaster to just kill the children, it was because it was jammed with mud. Source: Star Wars Galaxy of Fear 12, The Hunger by John Whitman. Please like and follow if you enjoyed this disturbing lore story and would like to see more obscure and disturbing Star Wars Legends lore. May the Force be with you, my acolytes, and make sure to leave any vid suggestions you would like me to do in comments.